mean? And
he needs to do it like we did about 3 years ago. VMware.
All right.
Everybody go find a pillar and hide behind it.
I am getting a thumbs up from Julia, so I think we are going to go. So let me get the start recording going on TalkShoe. So we do that right.
Recording started.
Nice. And we will get going. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you're listening to the VMware Community Roundtable Podcast. This is podcast number 468. My name is Erik, and with me today I have a special co-host, Ishmael Chandri. Ishmael, today's Wednesday, March 6, 2019. How's it going?
Oh, it's going great. How about yourself?
It's going great. It's great. We just got back from sales kickoff, so I'm pretty excited about the leadership conference, and it's a new year. But before we do that, we always have our co-host tell us the color of the bay. So if you didn't come across the bay, you're going to have to, use your mental telepathy and tell us what is the color of Bay report today.
The color of the Bay report today?
Yes, we need a color of the Bay.
It's, I'll say it's blue because there's a lot of rain today in our forecast.
It is still raining here in California, and we do miss John White. He is the sales kickoff today. On the show today, we're going to have Erik Hinderer. Erik is a senior staff technical specialist. He's a SME on NSX. He's done... founded the Northeast region's task practice. He's also a Kubernetes specialist, me as well. So we're going to drill into NSX-T. There's a new version of NSX-T out, so we're going to talk with Erik about NSX-T. He's going to tell us architectural changes that are happening in the product, as well as GUI enhancements and some of the field's reactions. So it should be a good show today. But before we get to Erik, thought we would just touch base on what's happening in the news. I'll say the obvious. We announced our 2019 earnings. It was a good year for us. We beat estimates in Q4 by 10 cents a share. So I just want to say thanks to everyone out there in the ecosystem. We're only allowed to talk about the financial data for like 10 days after earnings, and then we're not allowed to talk about it any longer. So thought I would just say, hey, it's great that everybody participated in a fantastic year, beat earnings up 10 cents above what we were expected. So that's good, and everybody was pretty happy at the leadership meeting that happened on Sunday and Monday of this week. Pat Gelsinger was there. Pat Gelsinger presented his Kilimanjaro climb. He climbed the mountain and did community work for schools and in India. And I think that was also really inspiring. If you have never listened to Pat talk about some of the charity work he does, it is inspiring. In fact, Pat actually teared up a couple times during the 2-day conference, and so I got to say, Pat Gelsinger, as always, impresses. The ecosystem impresses all the work that everybody does to do a year's worth of earnings. And what I would say is that Ishmael's here, and Ishmael actually works in our team managing all our finances. So when we go to VMworlds and we do hackathons and we get all the community booths with vBrown bag and everything like that, all the people in an ecosystem, Ishmael actually is the guy that's behind making sure that we can pay for it all. So what do you think 2020 is going to bring us? Do you think we're going to still have money to do that kind of stuff?
Oh, absolutely. It's just based on kind of the results that you shared with me from all your meetups, what happened over at VMworld, all the different great events that your team has been participating in, representing VMware at. I see no reason why we shouldn't not only come through with the same presence, but increase our presence and increase our spend at all these events to make sure that we're getting the right messaging out to the ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I know. And I think in a given quarter, we cut probably 25, 30 different purchase orders that go out to all the different events that we go to vBrown Bag, Alistair, and all of the code events, then also community stuff that we're doing. So I know I keep you really busy. So thanks a lot for that. And thanks for coming and hanging out with us on a weekly podcast.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity to come and kind of see the work that you guys do, and you're welcome for helping because you are kind of a troublemaker there.
I am a troublemaker. I'm always overrunning budgets or grabbing people's money that they can't spend. So appreciate that, which is a great financial quarter. So we're really, really pleased. And thanks to everybody in the community, everybody in the field orgs and all the experts and everybody out there that, basically helps us drive business. And some other companies in our space didn't do so well. And so if you want to look that up, we're very pleased with the fact that we did do well, and we're doing well in all different types of markets. So very happy with that. So moving to vExperts. So Corey, you're on the call. I know you guys are busy voting. When everybody's on the edge, when is vExpert 2019 going to be announced?
So we're going to announce. So it looks like we're going to end up announcing tomorrow. We're just waiting for a couple tasks to be completed, and so everyone will receive their emails tomorrow. Should be sometime tomorrow afternoon.
Oh,
I'm excited to announce this. The 2019 program. There's a lot of work put into it.
That's nice. I'm excited. I'm excited because I applied this year for the first time ever. Normally I just go in the tool and click the little button that says "Make me a vExpert." So I'm going to see how I do on my credentials versus just being a manager. So exciting. Thanks for doing all the work. I know all the vExpert pros have been voting and working in the tool to make that happen. So thanks to everybody. Shout out to everybody that's making that happen. And cross your fingers. We'll announce tomorrow, and we'll see if you get that special packet in the mail. So very cool. Last thing, I don't think I have a last thing, so I think we'll move on to Erik, and we'll start talking about NSX-T. So on the call is again Erik Hinderer. Erik again built a practice. He's a SME that works on NSX in the Eastern region. So very impressive guy out with customers. We're going to get to hear about what he's been doing out in the field. So Erik, welcome to the show. I think this is your first show that I can remember. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, how long you've been at VMware, what your role is, and what have you done in the industry before you got to VMware?
Sure. Thanks, Erik. So yes, my name is Erik Hinderer, and I'm a staff technical account specialist with TAM org, but we're really kind of different in terms of a TAM. So the specialist role sort of came out about 3 years ago when we started sort of seeing that client adoption of NSX wasn't realizing what it should, right? So what we figured out was that you had to really work a lot with them, sort of post-sales. So really what the networking and security TAS is a post-sales, sort of component to the pre-sales, NSX specialist, right?
Sure.
So we basically help client drive adoption and all that sort of stuff, right? So in terms of my background, I'm sort of a different kind of guy. I come out of sort of a DevOps telco space. So I did a lot of work with IVR development where you do touch tone phone stuff, DSL switching, stuff like that. So it's interesting because speaking of that, that's sort of my background into where I fit into the organization as a SME. So I support, the TAM org and the TAS org as a SME with basically NSX-T and Kubernetes right now. For the most part. And then I also fill a role as a DFW performance specialist, right, for firewall. So I'll just talk a little bit about, I guess, sort of thoughts on driving, things like NSX-T. What we see out in the field right now is really two big business drivers, right? So we see the desire for, businesses to have uniform security and networking between on-prem and cloud, and then we see a lot of shops right now doing interesting things with container development, right?
Right.
So they get into the area of container.
Muted. Unmuted.
In the field, right? So So I guess the thought there is, with T, what I'm seeing these days is really, a couple different things, right?
Right.
In terms of adoption, you see it really a lot in that, pivotal container space, Kubernetes, as well as just hybrid cloud, right? So I'll pause there, and I'll sort of go into some of the 2.4 changes that are really, big changes in terms of architecture, and that people should be aware of. So in 2.4, we changed the architecture of NSX Manager and controllers. So what we do is we converge, and actually the API as well, right? So we converge policy management and the control plane now into NSX Manager, right? So what we actually are doing is we're merging the NSX Manager appliance, the NSX controller VMs themselves now are now part of the actual appliance, as well as the API VM, which used to be a separate VM now that is part of the appliance. So what that does is that gives us the ability to produce a high availability architecture as well as scale out capabilities, right? Because when we had the construct of, controllers and manager and all those sort of things, there was just restraints, around that. So what's really kind of neat now is we have that converged now into the appliance. So that does a few different things for us, right? In terms of, like I said, high availability, scale. And what's really interesting is it changes the actual interface greatly, right? So when you converge things like controllers, right? So NSX controllers basically are, databases that store very similar data to like a CAN table and a switch, right? So MAC address, IP address, but they also store security constructs, right? So things like network security groups, tags, and all that information is stored in a controller in NSX-T, right? So in V, it was stored, those security objects were stored in vCenter. But now T, the security constructs are stored in the controllers. So those security constructs are now pushed up into the actual manager appliance, which gives us the ability to control scale when we go across different, infrastructure from on-prem to cloud and things like that. So I guess going back to the UI, that drives a lot of the UI changes that you see when you first look into the UI, right? So first and foremost, the UI is HTML5, right? So if you see it, it's a huge improvement, just like look and feel. Has anyone else seen it yet?
No, I have not seen it. I don't think, I don't know if Corey has seen it yet, but most of us don't sit during the day and install yet, and maybe some of the people on chat have, but I have not.
Yeah. So I'll say this is, in terms of UI enhancements, the big things you notice right away is the sort of the landing page, right? So you get an overview of networking security, and it's really sort of, it's not separated out into sort of the component view like it was before, where you had each individual component. Now it's more of a logical sort of construct and display. So it's in terms of overall security, overall networking. And then when you look right away at the UI, the big things you see that's different is security and then advanced networking and security, right? So as I mentioned, there's the new NSX Policy Manager, right? So the difference between security and advanced security is really this. Security is applying to DSW through Manager. When you click on advanced networking and security, you're actually using the API, right, through Policy Manager. And so that changes a lot of how the security constructs are processed and things like that. So when we look at, something like security policy processing in terms of like what order do things get processed first, there are some different changes now in terms of policy manager processing, then DSW and things like that. So I won't go into all of them in depth right now, but do be aware that those are out there, right? So read up on those pieces. So some really interesting changes when we look at things like introduction of policy manager, and really what this is doing, and the reason this is happening is because we're looking to do some things in the future in terms of roadmap. So why are we merging that API, right? So it's because we want to do infrastructure as code.
Sure.
So we want people to use things like Policy Manager, right?
Right. Okay. So just separating those out. So you have API-driven functionality, you have GUI-driven functionality, but building that out so that you absolutely can do API-driven, and then that focuses on automation, right?
Exactly. And so when we talk about automation, there's some really new interesting pieces that we're adding in 2.4 when we look at like Ansible. So a lot of additions for Ansible, as well as, Python, PowerShell, and things like that. So when we look at how we're actually seeing people consume.
Yeah, sorry about that. We have somebody on chat that has been coming in lately. Mute. Mute all.
Presentation mode on. Only moderators can be heard.
We will enable. We'll have to get our guest back here as soon as we.
Unmuted.
Can you hear me, Eric?
Conversation mode on.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone can be heard.
All right. Eric, are you there yet?
I want to have fun. Oh, girls just want to have fun.
Conversation mode on. Everyone can be heard. Unmuted.
Girls, they want to have fun.
Presentation mode on. Only moderators can be heard.
All right. If you can hear, Eric, if you can hear us, are you not on TalkShoe, I bet? You're probably in on a number.
Eric?
Yeah.
Eric is 216246.
216246. Okay, there we go.
And Corey's 925520.
Can you hear me, Eric?
Yes, now we got everybody back, and I think we've left the offenders we've left the offender muted, and we have unmuted everyone else. Although we're still not able to get the imagery down yet, so we're working on some of that too.
Okay.
So continue on. Yes, sorry, we were distracted by that caller.
Yeah.
We'll probably just go edit the audio stream
no
when
worries.
we publish it.
No worries. So I do a lot of public speaking, and I've had a lot of reactions. That's an interesting one that I haven't had before.
We get that during
pretty good
holiday
nonetheless,
season. So spring break, the kids join our live streaming. We have it open to the world, and and we get those guys that come in every once in a while on the audio stream. So we'll continue on now, and we'll probably edit that out.
Sounds good. So I'll just pick up where I was in terms of thought, in terms of why we're seeing these changes, in terms of in the architecture as well as the UI, and driving towards cloud and container adoption when we're looking at infrastructure as code, right? So there's a huge amount of changes when we look at, how those are being deployed, right? So things like Nsx Manager, things to be aware of, right? So when you start looking at 2.4, be advised that the requirements are definitely different than 2.3. When we look at things like how much CPU memory that Manager for 2.4 requires, right? So you're looking at like 4 vCPUs, 16 gig of RAM, as well as changes because, when we look at adding those controllers into the actual management of appliance, we need more resource there. So be aware that there's those changes out there as well. And then the requirements for the underlying infrastructure, right? So if you're doing things like ESXi, those are things like 6.5U2, 6.7U1, and reciprocative vCenter code as well. So just sort of be advised that quite a few changes to have when you do your deployment, right? Now, what's interesting is there's a checklist for installation, and the checklist for installation very similar to the upgrade, right? So be advised, go out there, go through the checklist for installation because it really walks you through. Have you made the adjustments in terms of increasing CPU memory, and things like that for the NSX Manager before you start to do an upgrade or you deploy new appliance, right? So when you look at those changes, those are out there. And one of the things I'll mention here that I see in the field a lot right now is the difference in licensing keys between NSX and NSX Data Center. So there's a licensing key change in V between 6.3 and 6.4.
Okay.
And then in T, when we look at that, so you have to actually file an SR with your license key to get an upgraded NSX Data Center key that you can use for things like 2.4, for example, right? So be advised that you have to go in, file a ticket for, I think it's product activation. So go in, file a ticket for product activation, put in your NSX key, say, hey, I need to convert from NSX to NSX Data Center. And that gets you through that hurdle, at least in terms of readiness, right? So that's one of the bigger things I see out there, besides just general component changes and sort of resource allocation, right?
Right. I meant to, before we get further into the interview, or at least you telling us about it, I wanted to ask first off, because you went through a lot, where are you located? Just way back here when you introduce yourself. Where do you work out of?
So I work out of Cleveland, Ohio. So I cover pretty much most of the East right now. So I have clients up in sort of the Detroit area, the Cleveland area, even we'll say sort of around Ohio, and all the way down to even things like Charlotte, North Carolina, and out in Phoenix, Arizona as well.
All right. Well,
so quite a patch.
Yeah, we are a community podcast, so it's always good to get a couple of those questions in there. Second one is we obviously have NSX-V and NSX-T. We're talking about NSX-T 2.4. Are you seeing, when you talk about NSX-V, where it's on-prem, really managing what's happening on-prem for your SDN, how much are you seeing people actually now taking advantage of moving from V to T with regard to like building true hybrid cloud environments, right? Because the true value proposition, the way I understand it, is T really does allow you to manage, the networks across multiple clouds, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about, when you're looking at field and adoption, are people really starting to move into the hybrid cloud world where you're building the infrastructure using T to manage multiple networks?
Yeah. So great question. And I'll say that we see quite a bit of that because we had, quite a few deployments in V when we look at it, quite a bit, large footprint. And those clients are well vested into that V architecture. So it's interesting, but they do need to go to the cloud. So most organizations right now have basically, either production V and then greenfield T, right, or the new installation of NSX-T that they're deploying for things that they want to be able to do in hybrid cloud, right? And then we help them with migration strategies between, workload environments, whether or not it's things like coexist instead of upgrade or migration, right? The idea that you have a NSX-D environment and an NSX-T environment and a coexist architecture where we route between the two environments and provide you that, that agility, right? So the thought there is, I see a lot of that kind of thing, sure.
Nice. And when as we moved into AWS the last 2 years, are you seeing people start to build out a true hybrid environment where you have we have networking running over in the cloud, and then how does that play in versus what we're doing as do we do an NSX-T service as AWS? I've kind of was reading a little bit about that on some of the blog articles. Maybe talk a little bit about when I'm doing hybrid up into AWS. Do you see customer adoption there yet, or is that still too early?
Oh, no, it's not too early. I have the majority of my clients do have AWS initiatives and have environments deployed. So they have these VPCs deployed. We see a lot of, initiatives around moving, some serious workloads right now. And when we look at what the people are doing, I think back and forth, We even see a lot of things like HCX, right, for, the migration of those workloads and things between, on-prem, NSX environments and then cloud. So we see quite a bit of that. And then speaking of that, things like NSX Cloud, that is a huge momentum piece right now. Everybody wants to be able to have unified security across multiple clouds. So the majority of organizations are not just a single cloud consumer, right? They want to be able to do things like AWS. They want to be able to do things like Azure or GCP, Google Cloud Platform. So they want to be able to do these other things, whether or not it's SaaS, for a specific service, and then have the same, networking security across all those clouds. So NSX Cloud is a big piece of sort of that multi-cloud strategy when you look at hybrid cloud.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. With regard to like your role in consulting, like where do you see IT practitioners? Like we've always had traditional storage admins, compute admins, and now, obviously network admins, and a lot of those were Cisco, trained and had big long careers here. What's your feeling? And obviously you're in you've founded this org to help adoption post sale. Where do you think admins are with regard to networking skill sets? Do we think that we're pulling more of the network admins that were in the Cisco wheelhouse over into the NSX camp now? Do you see compute or other admins moving into a networking role? What's your take on where the training level is, and how are people learning how to do this? Or are we pulling people in from the Cisco admin crowds to build SDNs?
Yeah, no, interesting enough. So really, in terms of our role, first and foremost, what we're really helping them to do is to make these changes in terms of being able to deliver to the business, new technologies that are just simply different from, older technologies of networking. So there's a lot of enablement, of course, in terms of that needs to be done. And of course, there's that two schools of camp, right? There are the religious network guys, right? And then there's network engineers that can kind of see where things are going, right? So, there's definitely two crowds out there. But what's interesting is the more that I work, even with, the folks that have spent long-term, networking careers, they're being driven by their business. So it's interesting because, a few years ago, I would talk to them or this or that, and they were really not as interested in, learning about NSX, right? In last year and this year, I can't stop them. They're like pinging me on social and everywhere. So there's a realization, right?
Right. So momentum is hit, and the guys that want to get there will get there. It might also be kind of like, I have a cousin who is a network administrator. I also have a brother-in-law who's now 60, who was a Cisco guy for many years. And you see the Cisco guy's like, I'm just going to run to the end of my career here just doing Cisco networking, and I'm not going to get there, right? And then you see the younger crowd who are like projecting their career, looking at here's where I need to be at in order to be relevant in the next 10 years, right?
Yeah, no, and that was literally my last VMUG, right? So my last VMUG was the majority of the engineers up front, probably 100-something people. A majority of the engineers up front, that typical older, Cisco career track crowd, right?
Right.
And then in the back corner, there was 4 tables of the kids in skinny jeans with the big beards, right? And here's what was funny is my first slide said, so why do these kids in the skinny jeans want containers anyway? Right?
Right. Right. We're going to have to stop doing that, by the way.
Yeah.
You can't make fun of the guys in the beards and the skinny jeans because they're taking over the world. So, but yeah.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's the interesting thing. And I will say, I think we have to say goodbye to Ishmael. So Ishmael, thanks for dropping by, being that. Go do some more finance, because we got some really cool things we're wanting to do at VMworld this year with code. So wring out the money and see what you can get for us.
Hey, I got you, Eric. Thank you so much for letting me participate. It's been an awesome experience, and I'll definitely look for some extra dollars for you in the budget.
It's a community effort,
Oh,
community
absolutely.
roundtable.
Hey,
So
takes a village, right?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
a community, actually.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks for dropping in. Yep. So yeah, Eric, it is true. I've seen this momentum shift in the administrators, coming around to SDN, right, and coming around to kind of VMware, right. And then as we offered up stuff for AWS, it was interesting to go to AWS reInvent and see a lot of these guys that haven't really thought about connecting things back into the data center start to look at this now and go, yeah, this is somewhere we probably want to go, because just running things always in AWS isn't where our long-term vision is for our growing small company. So we want to figure out how to get back into buildings and where we're running our own gear as well. So we're coming at it from a young companies coming, building their own infrastructure because it's expensive to be all in AWS. Some of the use cases don't make sense. And then there's the big enterprise guys that are the next gen coming, figuring out how to move some of their workloads back into AWS and security. So I know you touched on security a little bit. And we did have the spammer come in. What are some of the big bullet points? I know we have Thomas Korn on the call every once in a while. He's looking at some of the firewall stuff that's there. What's your sense on the security guys pulling together with the network guys to actually become a bigger role for one person? Because it seems like now network security is kind of the focal point of where to kind of lock things down and isolate traffic. Where do you see some of that progress happening as well?
I do, and it's interesting because the security teams are very interested in being part of it, right? And then there's some challenges that we see right away when we look at cloud adoption for security, because most of their quote unquote, security audit collection posture forms that they use to typically issue out to an application owner when they say, hey, I want to move my application. They say, okay, fill out this form, right? And it basically says, here's their model for defining what security policy is. But this is all based off of old standards that aren't really part of the cloud, because it says things like, about the physical server and things like that.
Right.
So it's interesting because there's a lot of challenges that I see where security teams have to, first of all, change sort of their audit compliance collection as well.
Right. So just whole policy changes, just to address the changing landscape of what a network actually looks like, right? And then where the security risks are. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
So in 2020, as we we're moving, what are some of your big challenges? What are you guys thinking about? I know you look at your goals and objectives for the year, and I don't want you to talk about anything that's confidential, but what are some of the big challenges that you guys are looking to solve in 2020? Pat talked about at the leadership conference that the networking business is now for us $1 billion business, $1 billion plus business now, billion and change. I don't know what the actual number is, but it's maybe $1.4 billion or something like that. Where and the momentum's there. So what are some of your big challenges going into 2020?
Yeah, so the big challenges right now out there in the field are that clients want to adopt networking and security technologies so quickly that it's getting them from environments like V to T and things like that, right? So helping with enablement, training, as well as design. So we do, in my practice at least, we do a lot of post-sales design, right? So we're still working with clients who they had a V implementation, and all of a sudden now they have a PKS project, right? So the engineers that they had were trained in V, for example. They're many times just recently gone through some ICM for T, for example, but that doesn't help them make design decisions in terms of things that they need for hybrid cloud or containers.
Right. Do you see speaking of roles, do you see the developers, because you specialize in Kubernetes, and I know PKE that we do, now interacts with NSX, and do you see the developers starting to influence and start needing to be in that conversation as well as they're designing the next generation modern apps?
Absolutely. So I had a phone call not too long ago from one of my clients who said, hey, we're panicked because our developers want to do Istio, which is a service mesh for containers,
right.
That provides application availability, right? The ability to scale based upon response times and things like that, right? So it was interesting. They were all panicked. They want to do Istio. And I said, it's okay. We have something called NSX Service Mesh, which is based off of the open source project Istio. So let's meet with your developers and talk about Istio and how we could help them use something like Service Mesh. Because, for example, the developer does not want to be responsible for operations. He does not want someone to call him and say, hey, log into your sidecar in Istio and tell me what mixer says for what's being balanced between what containers, right? So they want something like NSX Service Mesh, for example, because it gives them that view of all that same information back through to NSX, right? So through NSX, of course, then they can see, for example, application availability, even with products like Wavefront, right? So Wavefront is what we're using there to define and monitor all the application ability between those things when you have that service mesh, right? So I'm seeing a lot of developers actually initiate the discussions because they want to use the unified networking security, but they're not aware of what the offerings are, right?
Right. So one of the big challenges for you then is just to get the word out, right? And then is there like a scale up on training too? Like in order to get other practitioners to be able to handle this load, there's only so many TAMs out there. Like any strategies you guys are putting in through 2019 to calendar year 2019 to actually accelerate people's skill set journey with regard to SDN or Kubernetes and pulling that service mesh, configuring service mesh. I know those are almost like whole new practices that you have to spend time learning, and I'm just wondering if we
right.
at VMware are actually trying to address some of that.
So we are. We have huge initiatives, especially when we look at recent acquisitions, for example, the acquisition of Heptio, Kubernetes founders. We have huge knowledge that is actually being sort of built in for both, sort of the, I guess, intellectual property and the knowledge there, as well as delivery, right? So when we look at delivery, we're doing a lot more now in terms of enablement sessions, different things we call them in the field, right? NSX Ninja trainings and things like that,
right?
And whatever they are, for example, those things, right?
Right. So have you guys you talked about getting out to VMUGs? Are there other TAMs or are there other activities that when we go to VMUGs there might be some place to learn a little bit more about NSX-T and other other technologies that are kind of in this cutting edge space of building a modern app in a hybrid world?
Yeah, interesting enough. So the VMUGs are a huge driver right now. So we literally have a number of people doing DMUGs as well as different conference type enablement presentations and things like that that are not typical VMware things like DevOps, for example, right? So we have a lot of DevOps guys. I'll say that my Twitter feed and my LinkedIn feed is pretty full of DevOps guys these days because they're the ones that really are sort of driving a lot of this stuff, right? So it's interesting when we look at what we're doing out there. We're doing a lot of work with different groups than we used to.
Okay. All right. I'm just going through things that are top of my head. If you want to drill down on any other architecture features or any other things, but for me at the high level, pricing, right? I always you can tell me what you can tell me or not tell me, but when I looked at cost per port in the Cisco gear and the days, it was ridiculous. Like they're charging $20,000 per port per year, right? And I know that NSX has come into this space and cut that in half, right? So what's your impressions? Because you probably see a lot of field activities around what people are buying. are these prices fair? I look at it and I go, oh my gosh, still at $10,000 per port per year. Where is pricing going on all this? Is this ever going to scale out to smaller numbers when we're talking about managing network connections? I just find that whole thing when I hear about NSX pricing, I always cringe as an admin, but that's just because I'm used to buying hardware gear. Any thoughts on where the port pricing is? Is it where it should be in comparison to what the old Cisco gear cost? What are you seeing with regards to like people trying to figure out how to then reduce the cost of the whole network space as well? Or is that just never going to happen?
No, so so it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think the thing is we typically look at price per port, but you're not buying price per port. You're getting security policy management. So imagine instead of just buying a switch price per port,
right,
add your firewalls in there too, right? So if you look at how many firewalls are deployed in an environment, typically physically, it could be 36 firewalls just for something like a DMZ inside a major enterprise. And you look at the price of those 36 firewalls that are, some context-aware big fancy guys, right?
Right.
In cluster mode, of course. And those are significant money. Those are when we look at, those are $500,000 purchases, right?
Okay,
A piece.
Right.
So when you look at 36 of those, I think price per port, NSX, it's really not that expensive.
Right. So it's really the cost of the entire network solution, right? In one model, a physical model versus the network solution for your number of employees, across an enterprise when you're building an SDN. I guess is what you're telling me. Stop worrying about price per port. Right. Even though it comes down to a price per port, but it's the entire network infrastructure, not just a network switch port. So price per person
and
or
also
employee.
think about things that just like functions like load balancing, for example. 80% of load balancing in most organizations is really just very simple round robin between a few servers back and forth based upon some simple stuff. It's not very complex load balancing, and NSX services all that as well. Right. So when you look at the cost of, buying that need for simple load balancing or even some complex stuff now that we can do even more. But, when you look at context IDs and things like that, but it's interesting because when you look at what you're doing, you're buying a fabric, right? You're buying a network security fabric, right? You're not buying switch ports, so.
Right. Yeah, I get it. That makes sense. A good comeback to my snarky question on how expensive all this is. But when you when you consider everything you're doing there, that makes sense. And then yeah.
I was going to say I used to be a director and buy this stuff, right? And when you're buying, switch gear, routing gear, firewalls, load balancers. You look at just simple things like my SNS across all that for service and support was probably more than an NSX contract would have been.
Right. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on, I'll ping you with another question here, which is, what is the biggest mistake you see happening out in the field when you're building out your SDN?
So I guess the first thing I see, the biggest mistake is, and this is really important, I see this quite a bit, TEP subnets, right? So tunnel endpoints, or VTEP in NSXV, right? Or just TEP in NSX-T, which is the tunnel endpoint between physical servers, the nodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So network engineers, by nature, are taught to create the smallest subnet possible when creating a subnet for a network. And so they will ask, how many hosts do you have or how many servers? And if you only tell them, hey, I've got 20 servers, they're going to give you a very small subnet for your TEP or VTEP network, right? And that creates a lot of issues for us when we look at having to scale later, right? So the first thing that I want to emphasize is when you have TEP networks, whether they're VTEP or TEP, make sure you're generous, right? Explain to the network engineers you're working with and say, hey, it's only 20 servers today, but the business is going to add in X, X, and X. So it's really hard for us to change that later, right? So let's get that in now and let's have a more generous subnet, right?
That makes sense, right? And there's not a lot of cost to doing it in a SDN, so why not over plan for that and saves you a lot of trouble down the road. Right? Okay.
Exactly, and it's pre-addressing, right? So
What's the most positive experience you had at a customer site when you got it running? Do you have any kind of like stories? You go, wow, I worked on this. I worked with this customer, and by the time we were done, we all looked back and went, wow, that's amazing. We either saved a lot of money or it worked really well. So I think it's like the opposite of the horror story. What's the best story that sticks in your mind?
So I'm going to probably go with one of my guys' stories. So I won't name the guy or the client, but it's interesting because sometimes I'm not aware of these things even until sort of afterwards, right? When you hear the client send you an email or call you saying, hey, so-and-so came in and this was the outcome, right? So we see a lot of clients get deployed with V, for example, right? And then they have some business initiatives such as hybrid cloud or container development, that leads them to something like NSX-T. So now they're post-sales without any design help or how to get from B to T and all these things. So I guess the best example I could give you, I have one of my peers who went into a healthcare company in the Midwest, basically as the NSX TAS for their V environment. The business comes back and says, hey, we have to do all these things and we need to do it really quick because, such and such with development and it has to be in the cloud and it has to be, such and such. And so it's a PKS deployment nonetheless, right? So it's a huge shift in terms of, first enabling the client with what is NSX-T, how will we do design, holding design workshops, going through all sorts of things. When we think of just like PKS environments, you have different constructs for routing, like routed mode versus NAT mode. Is this an environment that's going to be QA dev test? So work through all these things with the client, help them through all the design changes, the implementations, or starting a greenfield environment, helping them build those pieces out. All the way to fruition to where basically, VMware PS and Pivotal PSOs in there, doing a PKS deployment. And it was so successful, in fact, they were really surprised in terms of how quickly they were able to get going with the new technologies in terms of, container development, in terms of PKS, when they already had a pre-existing NSX-D environment. And everybody they talked to said, oh no, this is going to take you, quite a good amount of time, right? And the difference is, the people we have a lot of experience in terms of these different environments, how to work between them, and it's really interesting when you see. I have another great one. We put a NSX TAS in a client, a large bank, right, very large bank. They had, full time they asked for the TAS. A year later, we put another TAS in there just to start helping out because it's still not enough.
Right.
And they say, we want a second full-time TAS because they're doing so much with these projects in terms of either hybrid cloud or, container development that, we see a lot of demand for that enablement and, assistance.
Do you see the excitement around this kind of stuff where you have these success stories? Do you see it kind of similar to like when you virtualize machines at the beginning, where there was just all this excitement around, wow, we just simplified everything and I can manage, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500 machines all through software now. Do you kind of get that reaction when everybody gets NSX running and it's behaving properly, that you just realize your network admin just went from super complicated working with physical boxes and updates to I have a panel that I can come in and control through software my network? Do you see that kind of excitement when people get this stuff running?
Yeah, so the big excitement you see right away, of course, is that immediate reaction when they have that realization that what they wanted to do, they can actually do, right? And it's interesting because when you sort of look at the excitement, I have not seen this, truthfully, since the early ESXi days. So I've been doing this stuff quite a while in terms of as a user, consumer, service provider, and an employee for VMware. And I have not seen this in a long time. And it's interesting because people are so excited. In fact, we're really interfacing differently now with who the consumers are. Like I said, it's DevOps, it's all these other business, it's security, it's all the other business units that typically weren't interacting with VMware. Very excited to be able to use these technologies to achieve business goals.
Great. All right, I got another one for you, which this is getting to be fun. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it and get one new cool thing, which you don't have right now, do you have any idea like what you would want to see happen in order to make it even better? So do you run into things that you go, oh man, I can't wait until we get this another piece done? And what would that piece look like if you've bumped into something like that?
So I think the most important thing that I would like to see us have is federation between NSX managers, the ability to have between NSX environments unified consumption and management, right? And guess what? That is actually on the roadmap, right? So some of these features I talked about today, in terms of breaking out that policy manager with the API and doing things like infrastructure as a service, or code, infrastructure as code rather, that basically enables us for all those forward-facing development efforts, such as federation. So to me, federation is where it's at. Once we get to the point where we can get across NSX environments, there's not much else you can't do.
Cool. Yeah, I can see that. When you're talking about writing code, we still have a few more minutes here. I want to ask you a little bit about how are people writing this. So in a real sense, there's languages, there's developers who are building modern day apps. Maybe they're writing things in Go. Maybe they're writing things in Python. Maybe they're still writing it in Java. But do you see the application builders actually doing dynamic configuration of the network based on some kind of activity in the app? Or is it really just building automation to manage your infrastructure efficiently, but it really doesn't tie directly into the app yet? I'm always curious to know where we are with regards to, I know we're doing automation for the infrastructure, but I'm always wondering whether app guys yet are actually starting to dynamically control infrastructure based on activity inside the app itself. So I was just wondering if you've experienced any of that, knowing that you've spent time in Kubernetes land.
Yeah, so they are actively deploying load balancers on the fly, typically as part of their application. And it's interesting, the network team is usually not aware that there's a load balancer in there at all. And they're doing that on the fly for all their dev, test, QA environments, and doing things like NAT as well, right? So they can have, hidden translated addresses that they can reuse over and over again. So that way the IP addressing inside of their QA is the same as their dev and test. And those are not exposed back into the network, right? So I see a lot of people deploying load balancers and all sorts of things.
Yeah. So it hasn't reached to the effect where when I'm building my app and somebody does something and orders 17,000 of XYZ, it's not dynamically configuring infrastructure to handle that workload that's in the app itself. It's more of just the developer team doing setup of environments, whether it be production, dev, or test, right? That's doing that. And I'm waiting to see like the Netflix world where they actually dynamically control the infrastructure based on the amount of movies they have to stream and any given 10-minute segment.
Yeah.
Right. So interesting.
Right. So the one client I did mention that was doing the Istio NSX Service Mesh, they are doing that. So they're basically measuring response time of their application based on number of users and a number of other metrics, right? And telemetry. And they are scaling out entire clusters based on that load. And they're doing it today in, sort of their what they call their next gen product, right? Because they write their own application, right? So it's their next gen product they're using it in.
Right.
But they're actually doing that today with that. Yeah. So
neat. Hey, well, we're running at the top of the hour, so we'll start to close off here and say, so Erik, where can people learn a little bit more about what you're up to? Maybe it's just going to the VMware product pages, and then are you on Twitter? And if so, what's your Twitter handle?
Absolutely. I guess first and foremost, it's Erik Hinderer on Twitter, so at Erik Hinderer. And in terms of a blog, I have a blog, virtuallyred.com. So you can catch me on virtuallyred.com. I'm also on most of the other socials and things like that. And then, of course, if you're looking for anything around NSX or networking security TAS, there's the official networking security TAS page out there where you can learn about what our group does. But like I said, social, at Erik Hinderer, I'm out there with my name.
All right. So I'll spell a little bit of that. So it's at ErikHinderer. So go give him a follow, ErikHinderer. And then your blog, if I'm not correct, is virtual and then RED, not READ, right? So it's virtual red is in the color red.com. Is that correct?
No, it's
no?
red as in it's red. It's red as in I virtually read that.
I virtually read that. All right.
So yeah, right. So
all right.
It's virtually read.
So it is READ. Okay. I could have swore I had it the other way around.
Yeah, it is READ.
All right. Virtually read. Very popular blog.
Most people virtually read it. Yeah.
Virtually read. I don't virtually read anything anymore, so I just virtually video stream stuff. I watch YouTube videos and learn everything on YouTube these days, which I got to say, thanks a lot for taking time out. I know you're over in Vegas at the sales kickoff, and you walk back to your hotel room to do the podcast, so I appreciate you doing that. Now you're going to have to walk back, but I hope they're treating you well at the kickoff, and I hope you have a lot of fun. Thanks a lot for coming on the show and just sharing what's new in NSX-T. And I hope we get a lot more people out there trained up and can engage with the product. So thanks a lot for doing all the work that you do. And thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Yep, awesome. And with that, we'll finish up with the vBarbecue report at the end of the show. So I believe that Wonderner did do some barbecuing last week. So Tony, what do you got for us?
I did. So this last week I actually did salmon patties on the barbecue grill. And the way I do my salmon patties anyway is crackers, eggs, salmon, mix it all together, and in this instance I threw it on the grill, and they turned out wonderful.
Oh, that's nice. We're supposed to get some sun here in California now in the next couple days. So I'm thinking I'm going to get out there and open up my beehives and get some fresh honey and then do a honey glaze and get it on some pork. So that should be pretty good. So if I get that going, I'll take some pictures and tweet that out because the bees have been active now again as the rain has subsided. So with that, you should be starting to get hungry if you're listening to this. Sorry about that. If you're not near food, it is lunchtime here in California. It is 1 o'clock. And so we will be back here again next week. I think we have some dev topics to talk about, and some of the cloud services guys are going to come in and talk a little bit about some of the new things that are going on AWS that we're working on in 2020. So until then, thanks for everybody showing up live. We will edit out the spring break spammer and repost the video stream, and thanks a lot for everybody on the chat. Good to see everybody showing up. Going to be exciting. We're working on some VMworld stuff that we should be able to start talking about next week as well. So we're back in 2020 calendar year 2019, physical year 2020 with a lot of cool stuff we're building out. So thanks for everybody being here. I'm getting excited for the year. And with that, we will hit the big red stop button now.